I'm excited to share with you all that I've contributed a chapter to the newly published Anxiety Relief Handbook. The handbook provides a unique window into 11 highly effective complementary therapies for you to sample on your quest to ease anxiety. The ebook is available on my website, happynurse.com.au/anxiety relief handbook.
And probably the most striking are the ones that we never speak about or are less obvious, the internal ones, the reluctance as a man to actually acknowledge that I can't do it. I can't be what I'm supposed to be.
Welcome to the Happy Nurse podcast. Nurses are the backbone of healthcare, always there to care for strangers as if they were one of their own, often forsaking special moments with their own family in order to ensure another's loved one is being cared for. As nurses, self-care is essential. I am Elena Mullery, nurse educator and self-care mentor for nurses. I'm an RN with 20 years of clinical experience. I have first-hand experience of stress and burnout. It was this experience which led me to develop a passion for personal development and pursue the study of mindfulness, meditation, hypnotherapy, and neuro-linguistic programming. Each episode, I will be promoting self-care strategies to those who always care for others. I have broken self-care down into 5 aspects: mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and indulgence, to make it easy to ensure all your self-care needs are being met. Each episode, I will interview nurses and self-care gurus from around the world to help you with each aspect of your self-care. Welcome to the Happy Nurse podcast with Elena Mullery. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Happy Nurse podcast. Today I am joined by Darrel Griffin. Darrel is the co-host of Burnout Bros. Burnout Bros is a peer support community for men in business who are affected by burnout. He writes regularly on medium.com and also delivers keynotes and workshops on the topic of burnout. Welcome to the podcast, Darrel.
Hi, Elena. Thank you for inviting me, even though I'm not a nurse.
I love what you're doing, and I think burnout, especially in men, is such an important topic that needs to be spoken about more. And there is a population of male nurses out there, so I was very interested to have this chat with you.
It's a huge... what's the word? It's not a huge subject. It's a huge issue not only in business, but in society in general. And I think that it's a growing phenomenon amongst both genders, all genders, but particularly in men. There seems to be reasons why it's important that we start talking about it, put it that way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love that there's more men like yourself openly having this conversation and bringing it to the light. We need to lose the shame and the stigma around it all. And the more of us who speak about it, the easier it's going to be to step out of that box of shame and guilt around experiencing it. So thank you so much for what you're doing and what you're bringing to light.
Pleasure.
Having gone down that burnout path twice myself, that's what drives me, what fuels me, what has become my mission to reduce nurse burnout. It's a phenomenon in our industry that has been there for a long time, but it doesn't get spoken about openly. And there's a whole host of different reasons that it has been kind of the elephant in the room for a long time. Why do you think it has become this elephant in the room?
A number of factors, Elena. I think they're environmental, societal, cultural, internal. From my own experience as somebody coming to burnout from an entrepreneurial perspective, certain things are exalted, like busyness. has a certain kind of kudos, even though, you might a busy fool, but as long as you're busy, then that is applauded. If you are going above and beyond in terms of, while you might be paid for 40 hours a week, but you're doing 70, that somehow has a badge of honor attached to it. In the world of entrepreneurialism, there's this whole kind of crush it culture where, you just kind of like go for it and you sacrifice, everything in pursuit of this, monster you've created for yourself, essentially. So, but also, there are cultural issues, and probably the most striking are the ones that we never speak about or are less obvious, the internal ones, the shame and stigma that you've spoken about, the reluctance as a man to actually acknowledge that I can't do it. I can't be what I'm supposed to be. And when everything in the media portrays men as strong and, occasionally it portrays men, particularly back in England, but also here in Australia, portrays men as the kind of sappy, kind of henpecked, kind of slightly weaker of the two, kind of, you know what I mean? It's kind of
it's like you're not a man if you're not providing and in suffering for your family, kind of.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I mean, there are all kinds of things that we can talk about here in terms of, the culture. I mean, you come from Scotland, I come from England, and we're both in Australia. But the first thing that struck me when I came here was that there's quite a drinking culture. There's also that in England, but there's quite a drinking culture here. It's big on tattoos and muscles and, work hard, play hard, and all this kind of, boating, camping, fishing kind of lifestyle. Not a great deal of talk about feelings and what it's like to be a man when you can't spin all the plates, when they're crashing down around your ankles rather than anything else, And I don't think people necessarily, I think as a by and large, generally people, and again, I speak as a man, as long as things are going generally okay, there's no need to address these things. However, when they aren't going okay, there doesn't seem to be a lot of people talking about these things. So it shouldn't surprise us that in Australia, there's 9 suicides a day, and 75% of those are men. And historically, this has been true in Australia. This isn't a recent phenomenon. This is a 100-year issue. 9 people a day for 100 years. What is that all about? So,
wow, I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah, I did a mental health first aid course in November, and that's one of the things that struck me. Wow, this has been kind of acceptable or kind of like the norm for like 100 years. And like, what is that all about? What does it say about a culture where that's kind of like almost just acceptable? It's not, is it? It's not acceptable in any culture. And yet the pursuit of, lifestyle, profit, whatever way you want to, I can be a bit cynical at times, but actually, I do strongly feel that, there's lots of reasons for it, but, the industrial age commoditized human beings. It was necessary that, we create people for the system. So the whole schooling of people, is schooled for the system, because the problem isn't just a matter of men need to start talking about things. These are deeply ingrained cultural and societal issues that And as long as we exalt profit over people, it will continue to be a problem.
Yeah, that's so important. That's what's going on, and we need to realize that is money has been kind of defined as the more you've got, the more success you have. Where actually, like speaking from personal experience, having gone through a divorce in recent years and going from a double income to a single income, but I'm now happier than I was for many, many years of my marriage because I've redefined what success is for me. But I think it's having and being down that rabbit hole of burnout twice, it kind of changes your perspective of life, and you do start looking at your own values and what's important to you and what success means to you. Because as a society, we tend to accept that success equals lots of money, whereas success is having a life that you feel fulfilled by and you don't need a vacation from. That's my definition of success. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when I was little, so I was born in 1966 to a working class family in Bournemouth and south coast of England. My dad was a carpenter, worked on building sites, and my mum was a receptionist, shorthand kind of typist type of person. They both worked hard. We grew up with, secondhand toys and the like. And if you fast forward then 50 years, so what you would call traditionally working class people here in Australia are actually quite very wealthy in terms of, well, correction, they have access to more money. And that doesn't mean that they have the money. So we have friends of ours who, if they worked in England as an electrician or whatever, they would be on a modest income. Here in Australia, the whole tradie culture is elevated to this whole other level because it's a growing and expanding city. So people have access here, and I partly blame the banks, right? I blame the banks, but I also, it's all, it's our own. There's so many things at play here. There's banks, there's media, there's culture. But essentially, if you play the game, you have access to money. You can borrow money. You can get your investment property. You can buy, a car for the wife, and but all of it is borrowed money, right? So it looks like you're wealthy, but actually it's all on the never, never, as we would used to call it. So it's all about perception and smoke and mirrors. Whereas
keeping up with the Joneses, I think, is that not what they call it back?
Yeah, exactly. Now, don't get me wrong. Within a certain, there's something nice about having your own house, and so, but there's a difference between owning and borrowing money, and to be able to borrow so much money that you've got to maintain a certain amount of income in order to maintain it. We know people that do fly in, fly out, and I understand why, but to mortgage yourself to that income, knowing that if you lost that job, you could only earn half of that otherwise, that's not very good that the banks will allow you to borrow based on that kind of it. I'm just saying that we make ourselves slaves. We like to think that slavery is something in the dim and distant past, but if we've got debt, we are slaves.
Yeah, we're slaves to the money, aren't we?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting listening to you talk there. There's a quote coming to mind from Brené Brown. I'm sure you've heard of Brené Brown. And she speaks about how today we are the most overweight, addicted, and in-debt society in the history of the world.
Yeah.
How can that be success. It's when you look at it like that, you think, what the actual is going on here?
So it becomes a lottery as to where you're born in the world, right? So if you're born in a wealthy nation, then to a certain extent, you'll have enough, I mean, of course, there is poverty and wealth in every culture. But I guess the point being is that we are all kind of and we all are susceptible to it. I mean, if I look at it, my own personal experience, becoming a father at 45 and suddenly having this responsibility, okay, I need to kind of, make this happen. Yet there is a drive in all of us towards something that perhaps we can never attain.
And I think it's the external pressures that kind of guide us down that rabbit hole. The keeping up with the Joneses stuff, which we don't realize we're doing, but it's the media is so powerful. And like you were saying before, it's that I use the term toxic masculinity, whereas you're not perceived to be a man unless you are, have a sleeve of tattoos, you're in the gym, you're ripped, it's this impossible ideal people are trying to strive for.
Yeah.
And it's someone else's definition of happiness, not their own.
Of course, because we don't, there's this perhaps it's just inbuilt desire to, I've never really had an issue with being a bit different, but there's something that we find kind of a little bit awkward about not being like other people, and I think if I was 25 rather than 55 this year, I think I might be more prone to, I couldn't be ripped now, even if I wanted to. And I'm quite happy with that, Elena, to be honest with you. And, the prospect of having tattoos which are only going to shrivel up in the next 20 years, I don't quite really interested in that either, to be fair. But yeah, the pressure, societal, media, internal, all of these things conspire against us. And for men who have been brought up to be man, if I think about men in my peer age group, typically we would have been brought up by men who had taught us not to cry and not to express emotion, and, anything other than footy and cars is, let the women talk about that stuff. It's kind of like a real shame that men have been almost forced into a stereotyped cookie cutter male kind of thing, when actually, funnily enough, just a little segue, I've been volunteering to do reading with kids at school, right? My children are in primary school, and the kids don't get a chance to read at home. A lot of the kids, their parents are so busy that they don't get a chance to read at home. So they're falling behind with their reading. So I go in, on a Wednesday morning and listen to some of the kids reading. And, that's a tragedy in itself.
It is, yeah.
But you're seeing already with some of the boys, I've noticed it particularly with the boys, that they have already, at the age of 6, being shaped into something that, they're a product of their upbringing. And, and again, that's a lottery because, we don't choose our parents. We don't choose where we're born. We don't, and so perhaps it's not surprising in many ways that we grow up to be the way we are. And, we've got to cut ourselves a bit of slack, in amongst it all.
Oh, yeah, totally. We are all products of our upbringing. But as a mum to 2 boys, I'm very aware of all this stigma and the boys don't cry and all that nonsense that it is. And so I'm the opposite. I encourage my kids to express their emotions, and it's okay to cry. And if they need a hug, they get a hug, because I don't want them to grow up with that stigma and that shame around not being okay. But I think it takes more and more people like yourself and myself speaking about it and bringing it out into the open. It's not something we can change overnight, and it's probably going to take a couple of generations to do it, but we need to start the wheels in motion to start making an impact.
Yeah. You see, that the issue for men, I think, is that from the moment we are born, we need our dads to say, I love you, son. I love you, and you are great. Just as you are. Whatever you become, I'm going to stand alongside. It makes me feel emotional because I can feel the little boy in me crying out for that. So what we do, and this is my experience, is we put all of that need onto mum, right? And she does her best, right? But there's something missing because boys need the dad's affirmation. That not when they do well at sport, not when they do well academically, not when they, sleep around or whatever it is that is considered to be manly by when they aren't any of those things, when they're just there, they're crying out. But the thing is, dads are the product of their own upbringing.
Yes.
So it comes down the generations.
That's why I said it's going to take generations to fix this.
Yeah.
It's not something we can fix instantly. And it's just the awareness and bringing it into the light and opening the discussion around it. And changing the way we parent our boys. But before we can do that, we need the self-awareness ourselves of how we are products of our own upbringing.
Yeah. I mean, I know when so my burnout journey, for want of a better description, started I've got a little sheet in front of me here, 26th of November 2018, when my doctor sent me for tests because I had chronic fatigue and a depressed mood, right? So these things, I hear some people giving tips and advice around burnout, 3 tips to overcome burnout. Well, go and have 2 weeks holiday. I'm talking about here, how long ago was November 2018? What, 2.5 years ago, right? When it started. But, and it would have started before that. That was when I'd gone to the doctor to talk about it. So, if it's chronic, it can take a long time to get to the point where you acknowledge it. And I don't know why I got to that point, but I mean, the point is that men, we're conditioned not to acknowledge this stuff because it speaks into that little voice inside you that says, well, Dad wouldn't approve of this because, it's not manly to fail. If, I can't fail my family, I can't fail my boss, I can't fail myself. If I acknowledge that I'm feeling these things, then I'm not a man because my dad did, I've not been brought up to acknowledging it. All this stuff going on inside, like the proverbial duck on the pond where you're trying to hold it all together with your personal brand and under the water.
Yeah, the feet are going 100 miles an hour, if not more.
Yeah, but the problem being is that some men are unable to even acknowledge this, so they just check out and commit suicide. I mean, what kind of societal and internal pressures takes somebody to go from, the only way that I'm going to be able to deal with this is to kill myself.
Yeah, it's extreme. It's so sad that we, as you said, as a society, we accept that that's the option some people take. It's
9 a day.
9 a day, 42 a week. That's horrendous. And that's just in Australia.
One person every 160 minutes.
Yeah. The impact that has is far greater on the impact of a guy saying, hey, I need some help.
Well, say, put it there. Use this kind of picture. You've got 9 people in a room.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So a room adjoining here, and every 160 minutes we're having a conversation. One of them puts a bullet in their own head. We would be desperately trying to find a solution to that. Yes, it's a big subject, and it's far easier just to say, I'm just going to, as long as I'm all right and my family's all right, and I've got my little mansion, I've got my car, as long as I'm all right, Jack. Sorry, that sounds like I'm being cynical, but that's what we've created. We've created a society of individuals who struggle to relate to each other because it's all about grabbing my bit, making sure I've got my bit. And then everybody that falls through the cracks, it's just, that's human beings, sadly. Yeah.
And it goes back to that wanting to belong to the tribe and feeling like you're good enough.
Yeah, exactly. So
you try to keep up with the Joneses so you fit in, so to speak, or else you're not good enough to be in the cool gang.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been in a cool gang. So
nor have I. That's maybe why we speak about this so openly.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny, isn't it? Because I remember the whole kind of thing. I remember when it really started off for me, and I woke up one day and I couldn't believe I'd actually been to sleep, and I was really starting to struggle with burnout. And then, of course, as a man, you go, okay, you start to think about it you go immediately to the practical. You think, I can't afford to feel like this. I can't afford to be like this. And the thing is with burnout, as you will know, Elena, is that it's like, so burnout for me was like this. Somebody got a screwdriver, unscrewed the little battery compartment in my chest, which is obviously metaphorical, undid the compartment, took out one of the rechargeable batteries and threw it away. So there's just one battery left. And it was often anywhere between close to empty to sort of halfway full. So immediately, so what you try and do is you try and fix it, because that's what men try and do. You try and fix it, but you've got nothing in the tank to fix it with. So it compounds the demasculinization of yourself, because you can't do it. You can't, the best I could do for about 6 weeks was to get up, get the kids to school, come back, go to sleep, get up, get the kids from school, get them home, and I was thinking that I can't carry on like this. And then you start accusing yourself of being lazy. You start saying, well, and then of course, then you go on TV, or, like you do, you hop on Netflix because, you're kicking around the house. And all of the male characters are either macho or,
alpha males.
Alpha males, yeah. And many of the entrepreneurial role model type of men are alpha males. Many of those who've so-called succeeded in business are alpha males. Many CEOs are alpha males. And because there's this kind of whole kind of thing about, well, okay, but the problem being is that these people aren't necessarily answerable to their staff team. They're answerable to the shareholders, and the shareholders only care about dollars and cents.
Yeah.
That's where it all is compounded, because ultimately, if my life only has value in terms of dollars and cents, then what does that say about the society?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge systemic problem, isn't it? And it, like, circling back to what you said very early on in our conversation, it's that overworking that creates that badge of honor. You know, it's almost like martyrdom. And that's rife in healthcare. It's like, I need to pick up that extra shift. I can't go home on time. I need to do this. And we do. I mean, I've been guilty of it in the past as well. You know, it's like, it's almost like you're seeking external validation through doing this that creates this kind of negative, toxic cycle of martyrdom. So you can be awarded this badge of honor for what? Running yourself into the wall. It's a crazy concept when you break it down.
I mean, this is the issue. I mean, I was thinking about this when I was writing about this. Well, you know, where is the middle ground here? It's like, you know, and I do write a lot on this subject. Well, you know, I'm not choosing a monastic lifestyle, a way to opt out, but neither do I want to go to the other degree where it's like you've just described. I've got to, you know, sell my soul to the system, the machine, the you know,
the hamster wheel. Be stuck on it.
I don't want to be a commodity in the system, right? Because that's what the system wants me to be. And neither do I want to opt out entirely to be, you know, a monk. Although sometimes that does appeal, to be honest with you.
It does have its, yeah.
But, you know, and I think that's perhaps why I'm self-employed, because I don't fit, I'm not prepared to become a commodity to the system. I've tried to forge some kind of middle path. They've not been easy at all because of, you know, you start to propagate, is that the right word? You try to think, well, you're trying to help people to think that there's another way to do this thing called life. But it's hard when 99.9% are in the kind of, you know, crush it and smash it and, you know, tread on anyone who gets in my way and grab my slice of the pie, because if I don't, nobody's going to do it for me kind of thinking.
It's all about the hustle, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, yeah. But, and again, that's been kind of glamorized. And there's this whole romance around kind of like, you know, well, you know, become your own boss and, you know, create your list and get your personal brand and, you know, and blah, 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 you know, and you end up, well, what happens is more often than not is that you just get just as busy, if not more busy, doing something that you kind of like better than you were before, but you still get burned out.
Yeah, because you're trying to do 4 jobs instead of 1.
Well, precisely, you know, and let's face it, as a, you know, we're all, you know, I have certain talents and quite a lot of weaknesses. You know, thankfully I'm married to a woman that covers a lot of my weaknesses. She's, you know, into receipts and things, which I think is a weird thing. You know, I am.
You're the yin to your yang. That's cool. It works.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, burnout, yeah. And it's hard, and it doesn't, and I don't know, your experience, you've described that, you know, you've experienced it a couple of times. But for me, I mean, it just doesn't, I didn't really have any major symptoms for burnout for about 3 months, and I thought it had gone away. And then a couple of months ago, I kind of like hit a wall again. I thought, oh, crikey, is this going to be the way it is?
I know I'm heading that way when I start wanting to run away. I get this overwhelming urge to run.
Yeah.
And that's my red light. I'm like, oh shit, something's not right. I want to run, because the second time I burnt out, that's exactly what I did. I got up one morning, and this was back in Aberdeen, and we lived in one of these old terrace streets with the Victorian tenements. And I came down down the stairs, out the front door of the block. And work was just round the corner. I walked to work. But the car was sitting there and I had the keys in my bag for some reason. And I just got in the car and I can't remember what went through my head, but I just got in the car. Instead of going to work, I started driving and I turned my phone off and I just drove and I found myself at Glasgow Airport 3.5 hours later. And then I suddenly came to my senses and was like, what the hell are you doing, Elena?
So tell me how did your employer deal with that?
They were actually very supportive. They'd been frantically looking for me, obviously phoned my fiance, was concerned about my well-being because my mental health had been suffering for a while and I was taking Prozac, an antidepressant. So they were concerned that I'd done something even more extreme than going on a big long drive. And they were actually very compassionate when I did come back to work. I got a few days off on leave and then I went back. But I worked in a very small hospital. It was very kind of close-knit and I was fortunate to have such understanding employers. So yeah, but that's when I realised I'd hit rock bottom the second time.
What is it in the healthcare sector that why is burnout so prevalent amongst nurses?
I think there's a few different factors. It's that martyrdom, that badge of honour, that constant self-sacrifice. And there's this phenomenon called compassion fatigue, where we're continuously exposed to very traumatic events and helping people deal with their own trauma, that we start to lose any kind of compassion for it.
Mm.
And it just compounds and compounds. There's also vicarious trauma, which is slightly different, which is just the continual exposure to these extremely traumatic events. So, we work in these high pressure, highly emotional environments. And if we're not looking after our mental health, then we can very easily start to see the cracks forming. And
that isn't, you'd have thought outside of nursing that, clearly it still revolves around money.
Mm.
You'd like to think that it doesn't. Even the conversation I had this morning on LinkedIn around the conversation that I had with a woman on Friday at a social gathering who'd had a double mastectomy, and she had both breasts removed. But she was talking about her close friend, who'd also had a double mastectomy, but had a reconstruction at the same time as the surgery and has minimal scarring. But that was all down to the fact that her friend could afford that. Right? Mm. So it all comes back to the problem of dozens. But in terms of, you'd have thought that in nursing, perhaps there would be a good, there would be, okay, we're seeing the signs in you. This is what we need you to do. No, none of that. Okay.
It all comes back to the money at the end of the day. We're running short-staffed a lot of the time, and there's KPIs just like any other industry. And I read a really fascinating report last year on LinkedIn that was written by someone in the corporate world. I can't remember exactly what sector, but they were reviewing the business model for healthcare. And they said it's one of the most flawed business models they've ever seen because it relies so heavily on the goodwill of the staff.
Mm.
Like only Friday night, my shift finished at 7:00, supposedly. I walked out of there at 11.
Yeah.
Because there was no one coming in to let me go. I work in the private sector. It's not like there's someone coming in to let you go. If there's still patients in the building that need looking after, I can't just walk out.
So should things like healthcare, education, should these things, when you think about it, these things didn't exist hundreds of years ago, and should they not be private sector at all? Should it be completely public run?
I don't know, because the public sector's got its own faults as well. I worked in the NHS, in the UK. Yeah. And it's the end of the day that relies on government funding, so it's also being run as a business. It's both sectors have their own different challenges.
Perhaps the issue then on a governmental level is that, there should be a guaranteed amount of tax go to health, guaranteed amount of taxes that go to education, all of it going into one general pot where Peter robs Paul, and, where we can't give you this money that we promised you before we got elected because it's gone for roads or something, that guy. Yeah. Oh, we just fix it in 2 minutes, Sharon.
It'd be so good if we could, but
I want to ask you a question, actually, regarding, do you think that those of us, now, let me be honest with you, I am a man who is very much in touch with my emotions and my feelings, and I take a lot of notice of them. I don't know whether that's, I don't know. I've not lived as another man, so I don't know if other men are the same. But what I wanted to ask is, do you think that burnout is more prevalent with those of us who perhaps have strong empathy, compassion? Are we more prone to it if we feel things more strong? If we can't compartmentalize, is that a word?
I don't think it's about compartmentalization. I think it's about having clear boundaries and knowing what they are. I think people like yourself and I who are very empathic and compassionate, we can very easily start to self-sacrifice if we don't know where the boundary is. So it's about coming back to that self-care and looking after yourself rather than worrying about someone else. What I always say is, if you're saying yes to someone else means you're saying no to yourself, then you need to reconsider what it is you're saying.
Yeah, easier said than done. Cool.
It is, and it takes a lot of practice, especially with all these societal beliefs and conditionings that we have. But once you start to delve into your own psyche and understand what makes you tick and your values and your beliefs, you start to recognize pretty quickly where they're becoming out of alignment and where you may be buying into someone else's rather than your own.
Yeah, I get it, yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
Because I know even take, for example, my marriage. I remember a few times in the early years after we split up, I'd say something and then I would think, because I'd been doing personal development for years before, and then I would think, why did I say that? That's not actually my belief. That's my ex-husband's, and I've just adopted it as my own to keep the peace with him. And I'm like, but now I'm not with him. I can follow my own. It's so subtle little things that we pick up along the way and we lose who we are.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right, because many times I've apologized for the way that I am,
Yeah.
I know that sounds a bit odd, but I'm, making kind of, I like shoes. I just do like shoes. I am what I am. And many times I've ridiculed myself because I'm not the ripped tat kind of guy, And I think that I should be. And I've been teetotal since 2007. I like the Bee Gees. I like opera. I'll cry at a movie, whatever, when the medication doesn't stop me from crying.
But we need more men like you, Darrel. That's what,
Well, that's what I've been saying.
Yeah, we do. We need more guys who are willing to be their own selves.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about being homesick. And for you're a migrant like myself. The first 6 years was in Australia, I was incredibly homesick to the point I was going home once every 8 months at one point, and I'd bump into old friends in the street and they'd be like, Lena, I thought you'd moved to Australia. And I was like, I have. And they're like, well, why are you always here?
Yeah.
And And then my marriage ended. And I realized through this unraveling process and really looking into myself, I wasn't actually homesick for Scotland. I was homesick for Elena and who she really was at her core. Yeah. And once I rediscovered her, I've never been homesick since. I'm so happy here in Australia.
And how did you do that then?
Through a whole process of just looking at my values, my limiting beliefs, diving into mindfulness, meditation. I studied NLP, and that's why I'm so passionate about what I do now and what I teach and how to prevent going down that burnout. Because I think if we know who we are at our core, we're going to be less predisposed to heading towards burnout, because we're not going to be doing things for external validation and people pleasing and fitting in with the societal norms. We will be happy with who we are.
It took me 5 years of being in business before I realized that values driven, not, I'm looking at everybody else and saying, why am I not motivated like these people? I should be. I'm self-employed. But I'm values driven, and that changes the whole game. And I think perhaps a lot of people are in denial that they are values driven or don't think values driven can be profitable, but I just can't be any other way than that. And
And when you have a values misalignment with the role you're in or the company you're working for, it's like shoving shit up a hill. You're never going to win.
No. I used to work in sales, right? And which was enough of a barrier to get over with people at the best of times. But I was attracted to sales because I could help people. But of course, when you're employed by people that don't care about the customer is just a hurdle to be negotiated in order to increase the bottom line. There's no way that you can serve the customer as you think they should. So you end up getting fired because there's a misalignment with the company boss. And that happened a number of times for me before I realized that actually it's because there's not a values alignment. So the problem is you take that into self-employment, think I've got to generate the business, blah, blah, blah. And you fall for all the traps. You go, okay, well, I've got to have my mailing list and I've got to have this and I've got to, and I've got to close business and, it's a whole other set of traps to negotiate in self-employment. But, being values driven is a huge subject. We can discuss it at the time.
That's a massive, I've recorded a couple of podcasts on values and understanding your core values, because that's fundamental. It's one of the starting points, as you know.
Yeah. So burnout, as we've discovered in this hour, is a huge subject, isn't it? So, any other questions for me whilst we're...
No, I don't. It's been awesome talking to you, Darrel, and thank you so much for having this conversation and bringing it into the light and providing a community for men to go to if they are feeling burnt out or recognizing any of the symptoms that you speak about in themselves, because I think having that peer support is huge.
What we have found, my co-host Neville and I, Neville is a counsellor in Victoria, but what we've been found, and we're about to provide a couple of other tiers of membership for Burnout Bros, because what we've been finding is that making the leap from not talking about it to talking about it in a small group is actually too big a leap for a lot of men. So we're providing some stepping stones towards that. So, and also a means for people who wouldn't necessarily identify it themselves as men to be able to support the work we're doing, because, Neville and I both, are doing this because we feel led to do it, but, we do need money.
Yeah. As we've discussed a couple of times throughout this episode.
Precisely. You do need some, unfortunately, and, we've all got bills to pay and mouths to feed. So that comes into it, but that doesn't have to be the driving force. That can't be the driving force.
No. So where can people find you if they want to learn more about Burnout Bros?
Burnout Bros patreon.com/Burnout Bros. That's where they can find a community handbook and they can join our little tribe if they wish to. Obviously, I write a lot about burnout and depression on LinkedIn and particularly on Medium, where if people really want a brain dump, then Darrel Griffin, well, you'd have to provide the spellings.
I'll put the links in the show notes as well for people. DarrelGriffin.medium.com. I try and write most days observations of a 50-something entrepreneur affected by burnout. I just shoot from the hip on that platform, really. So people might like that if they want to go there. Yeah, but connect with me on LinkedIn, but I don't do superficial very well. So don't expect a load of trite marketing nonsense. I like to talk about real issues. So. Good on you. As I said, we need more people like you in the world, definitely.
Oh, well, and well, thank you, and thank you for what you're doing as well. So
thank you. It's been a pleasure, and good luck with it all.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Happy Nurse podcast. If you've enjoyed today's content and would like to join the Happy Nurse community, head over to Facebook and check out the Happy Nurse AU Facebook page and request to join the Happy Nurse community. Also, check out happynurse.com.au for access to free downloads and subscription to my blog. See you soon, and in the meantime, remember to always offer yourself the same compassion that you so freely give to others. I'm excited to share with you all that I've contributed a chapter to the newly published Anxiety Relief Handbook. The handbook provides a unique window into 11 highly effective complementary therapies for you to sample on your quest to ease anxiety. The ebook is available on my website, happynurse.com.au/anxiety relief handbook.